A wolf could survive shame longer than she could survive erasure. Hunger hollowed the body, exile thinned the spirit, and grief bent the spine. But scent was lineage, memory, oath, and home. It was the invisible thread that told every other wolf who had held you as an infant, whose fire had warmed your first winter, whose blood had named you kin. Valentina Stoneheart understood all of that with brutal clarity when the winter oath wine touched her tongue and turned to poison, because in the same night she felt her throat burn raw and her scent fade to nothing, as though the world had already decided she was better remembered as absence. The feast hall had been dressed in evergreen and iron lanterns, all silver bowls and carved antler cups, the annual ritual where every family renewed vows to protect the next generation. Snow hissed against the roof while elders spoke of continuity and honor. Valentina had sat at the lower table, one hand hidden beneath embroidered wool, palm resting over the small curve of her belly. She had not yet announced the pregnancy beyond the inner circle. Too early, they said. Too precarious, they said. Wait until the first moon turn. She waited. Then she drank. The liquid had tasted of blackberries and winter spice, then copper, then heat so sharp it felt like swallowing embers. Her cup clattered from her hand. Conversations fractured around her. She pressed fingers to her lips, breath stuttering, and the room lurched sideways under torchlight. "Get the healer!" someone shouted. "No!" Elder Brannock snapped from the dais, voice cutting through panic. "No one touches her." Valentina looked up through watering eyes and saw faces hardening, not with fear for her, but with judgment. The nearest women drew back first, nostrils flaring. A young guard stepped closer, sniffed once, then recoiled as if struck. "She has no scent," he whispered. That whisper moved through the room faster than fire through dry brush. No scent. No scent. No scent. Valentina forced herself to speak through the burning in her throat. "It was the wine. I need clean water." Brannock descended 2 steps, hands clasped behind his back, ceremonial chain bright against his chest. "Wolves do not lose scent from bad wine. They lose scent when they call dark rites." "That is a lie." Her voice cracked. "Test the cask. Test my cup." A woman from the high table stood. Luna Morel, beautiful and severe, her braid pinned with silver claws. And who among us has seen her shift this season? Who has heard her wolf song? She keeps to shadows, avoids ceremony, and now this. Her gaze dropped pointedly to Valentina's belly. Perhaps there is more she hides. Hands seized Valentina's arms before she could rise. Rope bit her wrists. She turned, searching for one familiar ally in the shifting circle of faces, and found only avoidance. Even those who had once shared bread with her stared at the floor. "Please," she said, and the word came out shredded. "I am carrying pack blood." Brannock's expression did not move. "Or carrying blight." They dragged her from the table as music died behind her. No trial was called. No formal accusation was written. By the time dawn stained the eastern ridge with iron-gray light, they had already decided the verdict and the theater that would make it look righteous. They marched her to the boundary stones with no cloak, no escort beyond guards, and wrists still striped red where rope had rubbed skin raw. Frost cracked under bare feet. The morning air slashed through her thin feast gown. Her body shook from cold and poison in uneven waves, and each breath scraped like glass. She kept trying to catch her own scent in the wind, some trace of pine smoke and cedar oil and skin, anything that proved she remained herself. Nothing. Nothing at all. At the oldest marker, a granite slab etched with pack sigils, Brannock lifted his staff and spoke in the same ceremonial cadence he would have used to bless a union. "Valentina Stoneheart is cast out for suspected blood corruption and oath betrayal. Any wolf who shelters her shares her sentence. Let the wild take what we refuse." Refuse, as if she were spoiled meat. She lifted her chin because pride was the only garment they had not stripped away. You are condemning your own. Morel stepped forward just enough for Valentina to see satisfaction beneath practiced solemnity. If the child is clean, the moon will decide. If not, this was mercy. Mercy. The word landed colder than snow. A guard cut the rope at her wrists and shoved her across the line of stones. She stumbled, caught herself, and turned once more toward the men and women she had called family. Not one met her eyes now. Brannock struck his staff to ground. The gate closed. The bolts fell. Silence answered her. By the second hour after sunrise, the sky had thickened with low cloud, and Valentina had made it only as far as the border reeds, a tangled stretch between forest and ravine, where ice glazed every stem. Her feet were numb. Her fingers had gone stiff with cold. Poison kept rising in surges, hot and nauseating, then dropping away and leaving her weak enough to sway. Inside, fear moved in tight circles. If I have no scent, I have no warning. If I have no scent, no ally can track me. If I have no scent, I can vanish while still breathing. Her palm pressed over her belly again, urgent and protective. "Stay with me," she whispered, not sure whether she meant the child, herself, or both. A sound clicked through the reeds, then another, thin and metallic. She half turned. Pain punched into her shoulder. A dart jutted from flesh just below her collarbone, dark shaft quivering. She ripped it free on instinct, and fresh poison flooded her blood so quickly her knees almost buckled. Before she could move, a second dart struck high in her thigh. The world flashed white at the edges. Not exile then. Execution. The realization arrived clean and lethal. They had staged the dawn for witnesses and sent hunters to finish what ceremony could not openly claim. Valentina dropped low into the reeds, forcing breath past panic. Voices carried faintly from behind the stones, not close enough to catch words, but close enough to tell her they had watchers. Ahead, the land sloped into a ravine cut deep by spring meltwater, now mostly frozen, with pockets of moss where stone held heat. If she could reach the ravine floor, she could break sightlines and buy time. She moved. Each step dragged fire through muscle. Poison made her vision pulse. Reeds slapped her face and left cold, wet streaks. Once she slipped, landed hard on one knee, and tasted blood where she bit her tongue. She pushed up again, one hand gripping her belly, the other clawing for branches and roots. Wind carried wolf howls from far left, then right, triangulating. They were hurting her. She reached the lip of the ravine and slid down half on her feet, half on her side, scraping palms and hip against stone. At the bottom, she crawled beneath an overhang of black rock where frozen runoff formed glassy teeth. Her breaths came ragged and shallow. Her heart hammered against ribs hard enough to hurt. It was too loud, too visible, a drumbeat for killers. Above, shadows moved along the ravine edge, not full wolves yet, but men with wolves close to the skin, silhouettes broad-shouldered and predatory against the dim sky. One voice drifted down, amused. "She won't make noon." Another answered, "Take the body to the shrine. Magnus wants proof." Magnus. The name struck through fever haze and fixed itself like a thorn. She had heard it in whispers over the last month, always near the words purity, cleansing, omen. She had dismissed those whispers as frightened gossip. Now she tasted their shape in poison and understood too late that gossip had teeth. She forced herself farther under the rock until moss dampened her cheek and chilled her bone deep. Her hand found a loose stone and closed around it. Absurd weapon, human weapon, better than bare fingers. Above, footsteps shifted. One hunter started down the slope. Valentina steadied her breath as best she could. If they reached her, she would fight. Not for victory, for delay, for one more minute, for one more beat beneath her palm. The hunter was halfway down when a new sound split the ravine. A single, resonant howl, lower than the others and vast enough to shake loose frost from stone. Every shadow above froze. A massive wolf dropped from the opposite ridge and landed between Valentina's shelter and the descending hunter. Black fur streaked with winter silver, shoulders high as a war horse, eyes burning amber in the half-light. Not pack, not rogue, royal. The hunter cursed and stumbled backward. Windrider. The great wolf did not lunge immediately. He turned his head once toward the overhang where Valentina lay hidden, and in that brief glance she felt a strange, wrenching certainty, as if something in him had locked onto her without sight or scent, guided by a rhythm deeper than either. Then he shifted. Bone and muscle flowed into the form of a tall man in a dark fur-lined cloak, runes faintly lit along his forearms like embers under skin. Alpha King Cyrus Windrider stepped through the frost haze, knelt at the mouth of her shelter, and listened. Not to the wind, not to the hunters, but to her chest. His voice was low, controlled, and edged with fury. "I cannot scent you," he said, "but I can hear your heart from 20 paces. Stay with me, Valentina." Valentina tried to answer him, but her tongue felt heavy, and the edges of his face kept blurring into shadow and torchlight that did not exist. Above them, the hunters recovered from their shock. One slid down the ravine wall with a short blade drawn, boots scattering pebbles. Another raised a bough from the lip of the ridge. Cyrus did not look away from her. "Close your hand," he said quietly, and only then did she realize her fingers had gone slack around the stone she had meant to use as a weapon. "Good. Keep breathing with me. In for 4. Out for 4. His calm made no sense in the middle of circling violence, and that unnerved her as much as the poison. She obeyed anyway, because her body had begun to tremble in wild, useless bursts. In for 4. Out for 4. The pulse in her throat eased by a fraction. Then Cyrus rose in one smooth motion and turned toward the descending hunter. What followed lasted seconds, yet each movement carved itself into her memory with painful clarity. He stepped inside the man's reach before the blade could arc, caught the attacker's wrist, and drove him into the ravine wall hard enough to knock the weapon free without spilling blood. The bowman loosed an arrow. Cyrus pivoted, cloak snapping, and the shaft struck stone where his chest had been a heartbeat earlier. He shifted halfway as he moved, claws extending, shoulders broadening, a predator surfacing beneath skin and sinew, ancient and controlled. "Go!" one hunter shouted from above. "Tell Nightshade she's—" Cyrus's voice cracked across the ravine like struck iron. "Tell him nothing." 3 wolves in human form appeared on the ridge behind the hunters, silver-cloaked and armed, moving with the same disciplined precision as their king. Windrider guards. The ambushers scattered, some climbing for the tree line, some dropping weapons and throwing up hands, none willing to test the odds now that sovereignty had teeth in front of them. Cyrus crouched beside Valentina again, as if the interruption had been minor. "Can you stand?" She shook her head once. Her shoulder burned where the dart had entered, and the wound in her thigh throbbed with every pulse beat. Her chest tightened as another cough climbed up from her lungs. She turned away and coughed into the crook of her arm, a thin spray of red against her skin. Shame followed immediately, hot and familiar. "Do not apologize," he said, reading her expression before she spoke. "Not for surviving." 2 guards reached the overhang and stopped short, eyes widening when they looked at her. Not disgust this time. Shock, then concern, then swift discipline as they bowed to Cyrus. "Your Majesty," the older one said, voice clipped. "Scouts are securing both ridge paths. 2 captives. 4 escaped east." "Track, but do not engage beyond the borderline," Cyrus ordered. "I want names before I want bodies." His gaze sharpened. "And send word to the fortress. Poison protocol. Pregnancy ward prepared. No restraints." The younger guard blinked at that last order. startled enough to betray it. Cyrus did not raise his voice, but the air around him tightened. "No restraints," he repeated. "Yes, my king." Valentina watched the exchange through a haze of pain and cold, uncertain which disturbed her more, that he had read her terror before she voiced it, or that his soldiers obeyed him with the reflex of wolves who had seen him enforce mercy as law, not suggestion. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. "I am moving you now." She stiffened, instinct sharpened along her spine. Stranger, king, male, power. "I won't let them take me back," she rasped. "You are under my protection, not theirs." His grip adjusted to shield her belly from jostling rock as he lifted her. "No one takes you anywhere you do not choose." The words were careful, deliberate. Not a vow yet, but shaped like one. They climbed out of the ravine by a narrow switchback cut into black stone. Wind slapped her face and made her eyes water. She forced them open. She needed to see where he was taking her, needed proof this was not another transfer between cages with different banners. At the top, the land opened into high country, fir forests dark with snowmelt, cliffs layered like old bone, and beyond them a fortress built directly into the mountain's shoulder. It rose in terraces of slate and pale granite, ringed by watchtowers where silver fire burned in braziers against the gray afternoon. Banner poles lined the outer wall, each standard marked with a winged wolf sigil stitched in black and gold. Windrider territory. Real, massive, unreachable once. She had heard stories in her old pack hall, most told with resentment disguised as caution. Cyrus Windrider the Ruthless, Cyrus the Collector of Oaths, Cyrus who took no mate because trust had become a liability in kingship. Seeing his stronghold now, she understood part of what rumor had failed to capture. This was not merely a seat of power, it was a citadel built by wolves who expected siege and chose endurance anyway. Halfway across the approach bridge, another cough tore through her. Her body curled instinctively to protect her abdomen, and dizziness swung hard. Cyrus tightened his hold and lowered his voice until it was almost a murmur against the wind. "Stay with me." "I am trying," she thought, and the thought arrived in present tense, raw and immediate inside her skull. "I am still here. I am still here. If I close my eyes, I may not wake. If I wake, they may have decided for me. Keep breathing. Keep counting. Keep one hand over the child. Do not let fear choose your shape. Do not disappear." At the gate, 6 guards dropped to one knee in unison. None stared at her belly with accusation. None recoiled from the absence that had damned her elsewhere. Their captain, a broad-shouldered woman with storm-gray braids and a scar across her jaw, rose and opened the inner portcullis herself. "Healers are waiting," the captain said. Her gaze flicked to Valentina, assessing wounds with professional speed rather than gossip's hunger. "We can clear the east wing." "Do it," Cyrus said. Valentina caught the captain's sleeve as they passed, fingers weak but insistent. "If anyone asks for me from Stoneheart," she whispered, each word scraping, "tell them I died." The captain's expression shifted, a brief flash of anger on Valentina's behalf. "No," she said. "If anyone asks, we tell them you are under crown law and they may petition in writing." That answer, oddly formal, almost made Valentina laugh. Instead, she exhaled shakily and let go. They entered through vaulted halls warmed by cedar fires. Runes had been carved into lintels and stairwells, old symbols of threshold and warding that pulsed faintly when Cyrus passed beneath them. She could not smell the smoke or resin, and that loss struck again with quiet brutality. The world looked vivid but felt muffled, as if one sense had been carved out and left hollow. The healers met them in a chamber draped with wool screens and bowls of steaming herbs. One stepped forward with leather straps in hand out of habit, then froze when she saw Cyrus's face and set them aside without argument. Poison darts, he said, shoulder and thigh. Secondary ingestion at oath feast. She is pregnant. No sedation unless she consents. Valentina heard the room go still at the final sentence. Consent was not a word she had been offered in days. Cyrus lowered her onto a narrow bed piled with dark blankets and stayed close enough that she could see the tiny scar at the edge of his lower lip, the kind left by an old bite. "Look at me," he said. She did, despite herself. "Your heart is racing ahead of you. Match mine." He took her hand and placed it flat against the center of his chest. Through linen and muscle she felt the force of him, steady and powerful, an anchored rhythm that did not flinch. The first true shock of the bond struck then. It did not begin with scent, because she had none. It began with pulse. A low thrum built beneath her ribs and answered him beat for beat, as if some hidden thread had tightened from her sternum to his and snapped into place with painful precision. Heat rushed along her spine. The poisoned ache in her limbs faltered under a new sensation, not relief exactly, but recognition so deep it bordered on grief. Cyrus inhaled sharply. His shoulders locked. Gold flared through his irises, swallowing the dark ring until something older looked out through his gaze. Wolf and man aligned in one stunned instant. The runes on his forearms ignited from ember to fire, lines of ancient script burning bright against skin. A healer gasped and stepped back. "Majesty." "Out," Cyrus said without taking his eyes from Valentina. "My king, the antidote must—" "Out. All of you." The command landed like a gate dropping. In moments the chamber emptied except for them, the fire, and the sound of two heartbeats colliding into one cadence neither had chosen and neither could deny. Valentina's breath hitched. A luminous tug tightened low in her belly, fierce enough to make her press her free hand there. Panic surged with it. Bond meant claim. Claim meant vulnerability. Vulnerability had nearly killed her. "This cannot be happening," she whispered, though she could feel it happening in every nerve. Cyrus knelt beside the bed, still holding her hand to his chest as if afraid the link would tear if he moved. "I know." His control was fraying at the edges. She saw it in the tension along his jaw, in the way his fingers shook once before stilling. For a heartbeat, his perspective broke through the bond in a disorienting flash. Not words exactly, more sensation and conviction. The silence where her scent should be, the brutal certainty of her pulse calling to his across stone and wind, the immediate terror that if he arrived 1 minute later he would find only cooling skin. The contact slammed her back into herself with a soft cry. She pulled, then stopped pulling, because distance did not lessen the pull. It intensified it. Fear and want warred inside her, tangled beyond separation. She wanted to lean toward him. She wanted to run until the mountains ended. She wanted to believe one male could hold power without using it as a weapon. She wanted proof. "If this is a trick," she said, voice shaking now, "I will not survive it." His expression changed, not wounded, not offended. Solemn. "You were poisoned under oath fire and hunted beyond your own stones. I will not add betrayal to that ledger." He bowed his head once, the gesture formal as any court pledge. "You owe me nothing tonight. Not trust, not gratitude, not your name on my law." He lifted his gaze again, gold dimming slowly back toward brown amber. "Only breathe. I can track that." The bond pulsed between them, hot and undeniable, then settled into a steadier hum that seemed to wrap around her ribs like a brace. Outside the chamber, boots thundered down the corridor and halted at the ward line. A messenger's voice carried through wool and stone, urgent and strained. "Majesty, council riders at the lower gate, Stoneheart envoys with writs of trial and transfer." Cyrus did not look away from Valentina. "Tell them the same thing we tell everyone," he said, quiet as drawn steel. The crown heard her heartbeat first. The crown heard her heartbeat first, and the words traveled through the wool screens like a blade through silk. Bootsteps retreated at once. Cyrus waited until the corridor noise thinned, then turned toward the door without releasing Valentina's hand. Send Captain Alira in. No envoys pass the outer hall. Stoneheart writs are to be copied, sealed, and returned unanswered until dawn council. A muffled assent came through stone. Only then did he look back at Valentina, and the hard authority in his voice eased into something quieter. The antidote will hurt. It will not take your choice from you. He glanced at their joined hands, at the runes still glowing faintly along his forearms. And I will not claim rights from a bond you have not had space to accept. The statement struck her harder than any command had. In her old pack, power announced itself by taking. Rank took speech, took movement, took dignity, then called it order. She had learned to brace for that rhythm so completely that mercy felt like a trick with a delayed blade. Healers re-entered in a careful line, bowls steaming, linen bandages folded over cedar trays. The oldest among them, a woman with moon-white hair and a narrow scar through one brow, paused by the bed. "My king, we should secure her wrists for the convulsions." "No," Cyrus said. The healer held his gaze. "If she tears the wound channels wider, she could bleed more than she can spare." "I heard you the first time." His tone stayed even, which somehow carried more warning than a shout. "You will explain each step before you touch her. If she says stop, you stop." The woman gave a shallow nod and turned to Valentina. "I am healer Mara. I will clean the dart wounds first, then draw poison from the tissue with heated salt and iron leaf paste. After that, you drink the antivenin in 3 doses. It tastes worse than regret." A brief, dry softness touched her mouth. "I apologize in advance." Valentina almost laughed, and the startled edge of the impulse hurt her chest. "Do it," she whispered. Cyrus shifted to sit on the floor beside the bed rather than above her, a king deliberately lowering himself until their faces were nearly level. He placed his palm beneath hers again, guiding her hand back to the center of his chest where his heartbeat ran deep and steady. "Count with me," he said. "If pain spikes, squeeze once. If you need them to stop, squeeze twice." The first cleansing pass felt like fire dragged through open flesh. Valentina arched, breath snapping, and her fingers clamped on reflex. Cyrus counted in a low cadence that did not break when she trembled. 1, 2, 3, 4. Mara worked fast, muttering measurements under her breath while another healer blotted blood with clean cloth and pressed warmed compresses to slow the shaking in Valentina's thigh. The room smelled of herbs she could not sense, steam she could see but not claim. That absence gouged at her in every pause between pain. When the paste hit the shoulder wound, an acidic heat spread down her arm, her vision speckled black. Cyrus leaned closer, his voice threading through the roar in her ears. "Stay with this beat. Mine first, yours second. Mine first, yours second." Present tense seized her mind as fever rose. I am in a strange bed with strange hands, and my body is no longer a map I recognize. I want to claw free of skin and poison and memory. I want to run though I cannot stand. If I sleep, they decide for me. If I wake, I may wake to chains with cleaner language. His pulse is under my hand, heavy and unyielding, like a drum at the center of a storm. I should not trust that. I cannot afford trust. But each number he speaks gives me one more breath, and each breath is a thin bridge over terror. I stay on the bridge. I stay. I stay. The first dose of antivenin came in a clay cup. Bitter was too small a word. It hit her tongue like ash and metal, then burned all the way down. She coughed hard enough to twist sideways, and a fleck of red stained the dark blanket. Shame surged immediately. I ruined your bedding. Cyrus did not hesitate. Kings replace blankets, not mates. The healers went still. Mara's eyes flicked up, assessing not the statement but the way he said it, as if testing whether devotion would hold under pressure or crack into possession. Cyrus kept his attention on Valentina, not performing for witnesses, not softening for applause. He simply reached for a clean cloth, wiped the blood from her mouth with measured care, and nodded for the second dose. By the time the third cup was empty, fever had climbed into her bones. Her muscles locked, released, locked again. Twice she jerked hard enough that the bed frame thudded against stone. Mara swore softly and glanced at Cyrus. Sedation now, or she risked seizure. Valentina forced out, "No." Cyrus answered before anyone else could. No sedation. Night deepened beyond the lattice windows. Guards changed in the corridor. Cedar logs collapsed in the brazier with dull, glowing sighs. Cyrus did not move from the floor. When nightmares ripped her awake, choking on the remembered hiss of darts and the word blight thrown like spit, he was there each time, counting breaths until the panic loosened. Once, when her hands shook too violently to hold the water cup, he steadied it without comment and let her drink in stubborn, uneven swallows. Near midnight, Mara returned with a narrow strip of leather threaded through with silver beads and tiny bone charms etched in old warding script. "This was prepared for labor wards," she said. "It needs braiding for activation, but her hands are not steady enough." Cyrus took the strip, studied it once, then rose and moved behind Valentina's shoulders. "May I?" She froze, then gave the smallest nod. His fingers were calloused, built for blade and rein, yet unexpectedly precise as he separated her dark hair into 3 sections and wove the charm through each pass. He did not rush. He did not claim familiarity he had not earned. He asked before each touch, even when the answer was obvious, as if consent were a craft he had practiced long before she arrived. When he tied off the final knot, the silver beads warmed briefly against her nape and then settled cool against skin. "Protective threshold," Mara murmured, satisfied. "It will blunt panic spikes and steady blood pressure." Valentina touched the braid with unsteady fingertips. No one had braided her hair since childhood winters in her mother's kitchen, before rules hardened and affection became a rationed currency. The memory hit with such force that she had to look down to hide it. Cyrus returned to the floor at her side. "Rest. I will answer the council when you can stand to hear lies without bleeding for them." She meant to tell him he owed her nothing, that she was a political burden wrapped in prophecy and poison, that no king held the line this long without expecting repayment in obedience. Instead, she drifted in and out while his voice marked time like a metronome against the dark. "Breathe in, breathe out. Stay here." By the following dusk, the fever had broken enough for her to sit upright with pillows braced behind her spine, though weakness still threaded through her limbs like wet silk. Outside, horns sounded 3 low notes from the inner yard, the signal for Moon Council assembly. Captain Illyra arrived in formal armor, storm-gray braids pinned with silver clasps, and set a folded packet on the bedside table. "Stoneheart's envoys delivered 3 writs," Illyra said. "Trial demand, transfer demand, and an emergency doctrine appeal signed by Elder Brannock." Her mouth flattened. "All rejected pending sovereign review. They have been lodged under guard in the guest barracks, unarmed. Outcome: not silence, not disappearance. Process with teeth." Valentina exhaled slowly. "Did they ask about me?" "They demanded custody." Illyra's expression sharpened. "They were informed you are under Crown protection and cannot be compelled without personal testimony before the Allied Council." Cyrus entered as the captain stepped back. He wore no crown, only a dark tunic beneath a fur-lined mantle and a narrow torque at his throat, bearing the Windrider sigil. The lack of ornament made him look more dangerous, not less. "You can remain here," he said to Valentina. "No one will drag you into that chamber." She met his gaze. If I stay hidden, they call it confession. A pause. Then he inclined his head once. Then you sit at my right, and they speak to both of us. The council hall was a vaulted ring of stone lit by suspended moon-glass lamps that turned every metal edge pale silver. 12 visiting alphas occupied the outer arc, each flanked by advisors in their pack colors. At the center stood the oath brazier, flame banked low, waiting. Murmurs thinned as Valentina entered on Cyrus's arm, then sharpened into whispers when they failed to catch her scent. She felt the old reflex rise. Make yourself smaller, quieter, less costly to defend. Instead, she straightened, one hand resting over her belly, and walked to the raised dais beside the throne. Alpha Doran of Blackwater stood first, gray-bearded and broad through the chest, his contempt undisguised. Is this wise, Windrider? You seat an unscented female at council, while blood-right rumors spread across half the territories. Cyrus did not sit. Choose your next word carefully. Doran ignored him. We request immediate surrender for neutral trial. Her condition is destabilizing pack order. A second alpha, young and sharp-featured, leaned forward. And there is the matter of the unborn. If corruption is confirmed, delay increases risk to every allied line. Valentina's fingers tightened over the wool at her lap. Corruption. Unborn. Terms that turned her life into a specimen jar. Cyrus stepped down from the dais and positioned himself between her and the circle, shoulders squared, voice carrying without effort. By ancient sovereign law, any challenge to a marked mother under crown protection is a challenge to the crown itself. You may petition. You may present evidence. You may not demand her body to soothe your fear. The word marked rippled through the chamber like thrown salt. Some glanced at his forearms where runes pulsed faintly beneath skin. Others stared at Valentina as if trying to see the bond without scent to guide them. From the left tier, an elder counselor in white ceremonial robes rose with brittle dignity. Elder Severan, known for adjudication rites and surgical skepticism. He held a narrow blade used in old diagnostic rituals, its edge etched with detection runes that glimmered blue in the lamp glow. Permission to verify, Severan said. A single touch to the abdomen. If the child carries null signature blight, we all deserve certainty. Valentina went cold. Cyrus answered, denied. Severan advanced anyway. 2 deliberate steps, blade angled down as though precedent granted him immunity. This is not about the female Windrider. This is about lineage survival. He reached toward Valentina's belly. Cyrus moved so quickly the nearest guards flinched. He caught Severan's wrist mid-air, and for an instant the hall held only the sound of grinding steel as the ritual blade buckled in his fist. Metal snapped with a sharp crack and dropped in 2 pieces to the stone. When Cyrus spoke, his pupils had narrowed, predator thin, and a feral edge roughened each syllable. You touch her without consent again, and no law in this hall will shield you from me. No one moved. Then, still holding Severan's gaze, Cyrus lifted his free hand toward the perimeter guards. Kneel. The command rolled through the chamber. Windrider soldiers dropped to one knee in perfect unison, fists to heart. Cyrus did not look away from the elder. Not to me, he said, to your High Luna under crown protection. Every guard turned toward Valentina and bowed their heads. The gesture cracked something tight behind her ribs. Not because it made her safe forever. Nothing could promise that. Because it made her visible as a person, not an accusation. Because authority had just been used to restore dignity instead of stripping it bare. Doran stood slowly, face unreadable now. You elevate quickly, Cyrus replied. I correct quickly. Severan, breathing hard, looked from the broken blade to Valentina and finally stepped back, chastened or calculating, she could not tell. Then let testimony proceed, he said. It did. Witness by witness. Accounts of poisoned casks, of branded strangers seen near shrine roads, of forged omens circulating in trade caravans. Illyra presented the captured darts in sealed glass and named the resin compounds that matched outlaw cult rituals from eastern valleys. A scribe recorded every claim in open ink, no hidden ledger, no backroom verdict. When Stoneheart's envoy attempted to interrupt with doctrine language about purity contamination, Cyrus allowed exactly 3 sentences before cutting him off and ordering the writ entered as contested due to lack of physical proof. The room did not become kind, it became rigorous, which was better. When the final bell struck, Cyrus turned to Valentina, where she sat pale but upright, exhaustion shadowing her mouth. "You can leave now," he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment, the king who had every mechanism to bind her and had used each one to make space instead. Then, in full view of the council that had wanted her boxed and transferred like contraband, she placed her hand on his offered arm of her own accord. Her voice was low, roughened by healing and by the weight of what she was allowing. "I am not ready to call this trust," she said, "but I am no longer waiting for your knife." For the first time since the ravine, something eased in his expression. Not triumph, not possession. Relief. "That is enough for tonight," he said. Together they walked out beneath the moon-glass lamps while the council watched in unsettled silence, and this time Valentina did not feel like a prisoner being escorted. She felt the first fragile shape of chosen ground beneath her feet. Captain Illyra fell into step with them at the end of the corridor, her face set in the controlled stillness she wore when anger was one breath from action. "The 2 captives from the ravine split under questioning," she said quietly. "One swallowed a tooth capsule and died within moments. The other asked for sovereign witness and named a patron." Cyrus stopped. "Name." "Illyra." Valentina heard the roughness in her own voice and hated how quickly dread recognized its target. "Say it." Illyra met her eyes. "Magnus Nightshade." The name landed like old ice cracking underfoot. Cyrus's jaw tightened once, then settled into command. "War room, now. Bring Mara, the record scribe, and whatever was taken from the bodies." They turned down a stairwell cut into the mountain spine, torchlight rippling over carved ward runes. The chamber below was circular and windowless, all slate table and pinned maps, with iron braziers breathing low heat into the stone. A single bound prisoner sat between 2 guards, wrists manacled, cheeks hollow, brand burned over his sternum in the shape of a crescent cleaved by a vertical line. Not a pack mark, a doctrine mark. He looked up at Valentina and smiled with exhausted devotion, as if her presence confirmed a holy text. Mara laid out the evidence in strict rows: 3 dart heads, 2 vials of resin, a copper ring etched with false elder seals, and a folded scrap of treated hide covered in cramped script. Darts carried marsh viper venom, null root distillate, and ash from consecrated oathfire, she said. It was not improvised, it was engineered. The scribe broke the wax on the hide and read, voice thinning as he reached the final lines. "Litany of cleansing, 9th recension. When scent is taken, blood truth is exposed. The Null Mother must be offered at Red Moon, so the heartline dies unseated and wolves are made pure again." Valentina held still by force. The room narrowed around the words Null Mother until she could hear only Cyrus's pulse, steady beside her, and her own answering rhythm pressing hard against her ribs. Cyrus stepped to the prisoner. "Who wrote this?" "Magnus wrote what the goddess forgot," the man said, eyes bright with fevered certainty. "He reads rot under skin. He burns it out. Where is he now?" The prisoner laughed once, dry and brittle. "Everywhere you left a frightened wolf with no answer but pride." Cyrus said nothing. Silence stretched. Under it, Valentina saw what made him feared in every hall from mountain to coast, not rage, but pressure, patient and absolute. The prisoner's smile faltered first. "He is at the hollow sanctuary," he muttered. "No, he was. We move shrines, always moving." Alira set a second bundle on the table and unrolled it. Route markers, shrine sketches, and a list of names written in cipher pairs. Mara traced one column with a gloved finger. "These are not random converts. They are gate clerks, caravan counters, oath witnesses, 2 low-ranked healers in allied lands." She looked up. "He built a network through administration, not armies." "Armies are visible," Cyrus said. "Records are trusted." Valentina studied the ciphers until one symbol repeated beside her own name, a small mark like a heartbeat spike. "What does that one mean?" The prisoner looked almost proud. "Heart known." Mara swore under her breath. "There is an old prophecy fragment from pre-crown manuscripts. Most scholars called it apocryphal. A child, untrackable by nose, known only by heartbeat, shall redraw the law of belonging." Cyrus turned toward Valentina, and for a flash the chamber fell away as his perspective cut through the bond. Ravine stone under his knees, blood on her sleeve, terror at arriving 1 minute too late. Then the war room returned, harsh and practical. The prisoner kept speaking, words spilling faster now that doctrine had an audience. "Magnus says scent made weak kings. He says bonds made pacts soft. He says if he drains the mother at blood moon into the relic basin, every inherited mate line fractures for 7 generations. No fated claim, no divided loyalty, only chosen blood." Valentina's voice came out low and clean. "Chosen by him." "Chosen by purity," the prisoner corrected. Cyrus nodded to the guards. "Take him back. No one alone with him. Check his teeth, cuffs, and hair braids for poison." When the door shut, Alira tapped the map's eastern ridge. "Hollow Sanctuary is abandoned stone and collapsed crypts. Hard ground, multiple exits. If he gathers there, we can surround." Mara shook her head. "Not if this litany is genuine. Blood moon rites demand public witness for doctrinal force. He will choose a visible sacred site and make fear do the gathering for him." Valentina looked at the folded hide again. Her skin prickled with the memory of boundary stones and official language used as a blade. "He is not just hunting me," she said. "He is staging me." No one argued. By the second bell after midnight, 3 Raven tubes had arrived from Allied outposts, each report worse than the last. In Thornwood, forged omens appeared on temple doors with copied elder seals. In Blackwater, purity vigils blocked trade roads and demanded pregnant wolves submit to scent testing. In Stoneheart, Brannick opened the old assembly square for cleansing sermons and called it Emergency Spiritual Order. Pressure spread faster than troops could ride. Cyrus dismissed everyone but Alira and Mara, then turned to Valentina. "You need rest." "What I need is to stop being spoken about in rooms I am not in." "That is already changing." "It is not changing fast enough." The words hung between them, edged but not hostile. Alira took that as dismissal and withdrew with Mara, leaving the war room hushed except for brazier crackle and distant guard rotations in the corridor. Cyrus moved to the map table and braced both hands on stone. "If I bring you into this openly, he gets what he wants. Spectacle. Symbol. If you hide me, he gets that too." Valentina stepped closer, careful with her healing thigh, and watched his reflection ripple in polished slate between pinned territories. "Magnus is using silence as evidence. He used my missing scent to make me an omen. He will use your protection to call me your weapon." Cyrus looked at her then, fully, not as king to witness, but male to female, bond to bond. "What do you call yourself tonight?" The question reached deeper than strategy. She swallowed, throat still raw in cold places. "A woman who is tired of being translated by men with titles." A faint, startled breath left him, almost a laugh, brief as flint spark. "That answer would terrify half my council." "Only half?" on generous nights. The thin humor eased nothing essential, but it gave their fear a shape that could be held. He reached for her wrist and paused, waiting. She offered her hand. His fingers settled over her pulse with reverent steadiness, and heat threaded up her arm. Not a storm this time, more like embers finding old wood. Inside her mind, present tense rose, intimate and unguarded. I am standing too close to a king who could ruin me, and I want the closeness anyway. His hand is warm, calloused, careful at every edge. I feel the bond like a second spine, holding me upright when memory tries to fold me small. Want is dangerous. Need is worse. Yet this does not feel like hunger with teeth. It feels like being seen whole, even in the parts I cannot scent, cannot prove, cannot defend with anything but breath. I do not know if love can survive politics, prophecy, and blood doctrine. I know this. When he says my name, I do not hear a verdict. Cyrus's thumb brushed once over her pulse point. I cannot promise a gentle road. I would distrust you if you did. I can promise you this. I will not trade your body for peace. Her eyes stung unexpectedly. She blinked it away and nodded once, then stopped positioning me behind your shoulder. Put me where I can answer. He held her gaze for a long moment, measuring risk against respect, crown against bond. At dawn we convene Allied command. You speak first. A horn sounded from the upper bailey, one long note, then another, the signal for urgent courier entry. Illyra reappeared without waiting for formal leave, boots still wet from the gate steps. Courier from Hollow Road. He brought this and collapsed. She set a lacquered box on the table. The seal stamped into black wax was not a pack crest. It was the same split crescent branded on the prisoner's chest. Mara, recalled by the alarm, muttered a ward phrase and checked the hinges for trap runes. None. Cyrus opened the lid. Inside lay a ceremonial basin no wider than 2 hands across, old silver darkened by age, its rim engraved with intertwined wolves and moons. Relic work, sacred work. Across the basin floor someone had painted a single line in fresh red pigment. Bring the Heartline Mother to the Temple of Ash at moonrise, or hear allied hearts stop one by one. Illyra's voice hardened. We confirmed the courier's story. 2 patrol captains from Riverwatch are missing. So is Elder Severin? Valentina went still. Severin had nearly touched her without consent. He had also walked out alive, chastened and public. Magnus had taken him anyway, because usefulness outweighed allegiance. Cyrus lifted the basin and turned it under the brazier light. Not blood, he said. Pigment and iron dust, threat theater. He set it down with precise care. But missing officers are real. We move now. The fortress shifted to war tempo within minutes. Bells rang in coded sequence. Armor clashed in corridors. Runners carried sealed commands to towers, stables, and signal fires. Valentina changed into travel leathers cut to accommodate her belly, fingers clumsy at the buckles until Cyrus stepped in, wordless, and fastened the final strap with hands that did not shake. 3 days had passed since the ravine, and the poison ache still flared when she moved too quickly. She moved anyway. In the eastern mustering yard, moonlight silvered spearheads and wolf pelts as strike units assembled in ranked arcs. Illyra approached with a final report. Scouts at Temple of Ash saw torch lines in the valley and heard chant cadence. Estimated 100 gathered, maybe more in tree cover. They erected a stone circle scaffold around the old altar. How long to ride? Cyrus asked. Under an hour at hard pace. Valentina stepped up beside him. He wants me in that circle afraid. He wants you contained, Cyrus corrected. She met his eyes. Then we do not arrive contained. He started to answer when the outer alarm changed pitch, dropping from command cadence to breach warning. Every head in the yard snapped toward the west wall. A plume of gray smoke climbed above the inner parapet. Too thick for a cook fire, too dark for signal pitch. Alira swore. West Infirmary. A guard sprinted across the yard, breath tearing. Captain, ward line tripped from inside, 2 healers down, not dead. Someone opened the postern and ran for the lower catacombs. Mara appeared at the archway, coughing hard but upright. Not smoke, she called. Ground moonseed and dreamleaf. It disorients scent tracking. Valentina felt the old terror surge, the world tilting toward erasure again. Then Cyrus's hand found hers, firm and immediate, and their heartbeats struck into alignment so sharply it hurt. Another runner barreled in from the west stair. Message left on the infirmary wall in ritual ash. No shield line. Bring her yourself. Cyrus bared his teeth, fury finally visible. Lock the mountain. No one in or out without Elira's mark. Third company with me to the catacombs. Valentina tightened her grip. I am coming. Valentina. He just proved he can reach me behind your walls. If I stay, I become the next room he chooses. The argument lasted one breath. Cyrus gave a single curt nod. Stay at my left. If I say drop, you drop. They ran toward the west stair as alarms hammered through stone. Below, in the mountain's oldest tunnels, iron gates slammed shut one after another, and from somewhere deep beneath the fortress came a low chanting pulse that matched, with sick precision, the rhythm of her own heart. They ran into the west stairwell with steel ringing off stone and moonseed smoke curling along the ceiling in pale ribbons that stung Valentina's eyes and turned every breath chalk dry. Cyrus took point, Alira at his right, 3 Windrider guards behind them with torches hooded to slits, because too much light in the old tunnels made the runes wake. The chanting below rose and fell in measured pulses, not loud, only precise, each beat landing against Valentina's ribs like a hand knocking from inside a locked door. The first iron gate stood open when they reached it. That alone chilled her more than the smoke. Windrider gates were never left open by accident. Someone had known the sequence. Cyrus touched the latch, then the stone beside it where ward marks had been carved centuries ago. His eyes hardened. Blooded bypass, fresh. He looked at Alira. He had help inside. They moved faster. The second corridor narrowed into catacomb vaults lined with bone niches and old oath tablets, names weathered thin by time. 2 healers lay against the wall, breathing but dazed, wrists bound with ritual cord. Mara dropped to her knees beside them as the strike team passed, already cutting bindings, already barking for water and charcoal. At the third bend, a whistle snapped from the dark. Nets dropped from ceiling hooks, weighted with silver chain and null root knots. Cyrus slammed into Valentina and drove her down as one net hissed over her shoulder and struck sparks off stone. Alira cut the second midair, then took a glancing blow from a thrown baton that split skin at her temple. She barely flinched. Left alcove, she shouted. 2 branded followers broke from the shadows, masks painted with split crescents, blades short and curved for close tunnels. The fight turned ugly and fast, all elbows and breath and scraping boots. Valentina crawled clear of the chains, grabbed a fallen torch hook, and swung on instinct when a third attacker lunged past Cyrus toward her. The iron caught his forearm and sent his knife skidding. She kicked it away and shoved herself backward, one hand over her belly, pulse climbing. More chanting. Closer now. They burst into the lower crypt chamber and found the missing patrol captains and Elder Severin bound to 3 pillar rings around a portable altar, alive, gagged, and furious. The relic basin from the lacquered box sat in the altar cradle, now packed with ash and fresh sigil powder. Magnus Nightshade stood beyond it in ceremonial black, tall and narrow, silver threaded through dark hair, his brand burning over his throat like a wound that had chosen to glow. He smiled when he saw Valentina. There you are. Cyrus stepped forward, voice flat. Release them. Magnus lifted a hand and the chanting stopped at once. You still think this is a hostage exchange. That is why you are a fading king. He tipped his head toward Valentina. She understands scale better than you do now. Don't you, Heartline Mother? Valentina tasted metal where she had bitten the inside of her cheek. You poisoned your own people to build a sermon. I offered frightened wolves a cleaner future. Elira moved for the captives. A hidden rune flashed beneath her boot and detonated with a concussive crack, throwing her sideways. Dust rained from the vaulted ceiling. Magnus kicked the altar stand. The basin spilled into a carved channel in the floor, and red powder ignited along old lines, racing through the chamber toward a black archway at the back wall. Temple conduit, Cyrus said, realization sharp. He linked the catacombs to ash. Magnus bowed with mocking formality. Thank you for bringing my final witness. He slashed his own palm over the basin's rim and stepped through the archway as the channel flared. His followers broke in 3 directions, some to delay, some to die, buying seconds, some to vanish into side cuts that only initiates new. Windrider guards engaged, steel on stone, while Cyrus and Valentina pushed through the arch and into a narrow lava tunnel that breathed cold updrafts and old mineral heat in alternating gusts. In less than 10 minutes from the first breach alarm, they emerged above the valley of the Temple of Ash. The blood moon hung low and enormous, red light washing the ancient stones in bruised silver. Torches ringed the old sanctuary in concentric arcs. Wolves and humans crowded the terraces, some coerced, some willing, all silent under the weight of spectacle. The central stone circle had been rebuilt with fresh sigils and iron stanchions, and at its heart waited the relic basin, now set into the original altar with channels cut to carry blood down the carved runnels. Cyrus signaled his flank companies from the ridge. Windrider horns answered from 2 sides. Allied scouts rose from hidden positions. For a heartbeat, it seemed they might contain the circle by force. Then Magnus's voice carried over the valley, amplified by runestones. Behold the scentless mother protected by a king who hides corruption behind law. Murmurs rippled. Fear moved through the crowd exactly as he had planned. Cyrus touched Valentina's arm. You stay behind the shield line. We collapse the ring, secure him alive if possible, and end this without giving him ritual ground. She looked at the altar, at the basin, at the channels waiting for panic more than blood. She understood the crux with brutal clarity. Magnus did not need to overpower her body. He needed to stage her fear where everyone could see it and call it proof. If she stayed behind Cyrus now, he would name that terror consent. She stepped away from the shield line. Valentina, Cyrus warned. She did not stop. He built this on my silence. I end it with my voice. The first rank of guards shifted, uncertain whether to block her. Cyrus held up a hand, conflict tearing across his face, king and mate at war in him. Then he dropped his hand and let her pass. As she crossed into the stone circle, the bond between her and Cyrus tightened until she could feel his heartbeat under her sternum, a second rhythm bracing her from inside. The crowd noise thinned to a hiss. Magnus watched with avid calm, ritual blade in one hand, the other spread toward the basin. Good, he said. Now kneel, and your child dies quickly. Valentina drew the small utility knife from her belt, met his gaze, and cut her own palm. Gasps broke from the terraces. Blood welled bright and sharp. She held her hand over the basin and let the drops fall. Present tense surged through her, bright and terrifying. I am standing where he wanted me, but I am not giving him fear. My blood still carries poison residue. Mara said it lodged deep, stubborn as memory. He wrote sigils to erase scent. He never imagined a bond carried by pulse. I am not empty. I am not null. I am a living signal he cannot own. The child inside me is not an omen to be harvested. Cyrus is at my back. Not in front of me, because I asked him for that ground. Every wolf in this valley is waiting to see whether I break. I do not break. I choose. She pressed her bleeding palm flat to the basin floor and reached through the bond, not with scent, but with rhythm. Heat lanced up her arm. The sigils flared, lurched, then reversed. Instead of nulling the air, the runes began amplifying heartbeats. One by one, hidden cult followers in the outer trees lit up to her perception as pulsing points, each cadence stamped by the same chant-trained pattern. She heard them like drums in fog. She pointed with her free hand. North Terrace, 7 behind the ash cedars. East Stair, 4 under gray cloaks. Ridge Shadow, 2 archers. Elira reacted instantly, relaying targets with command whistles. Windrider squads peeled and struck. Ambushers who had been invisible by scent were dragged into torchlight by pulse tracking and bound on the stones. Magnus's composure cracked. "What did you do?" Valentina kept her palm on the altar, blood feeding light through the channels. A luminous barrier rose around her abdomen, thin as glass and bright as moonfire, holding when a thrown dart shattered against it. "I used what you left in me." He lunged with the ritual blade, face stripped of sermon calm. "Then I cut it out." He aimed low, toward her belly. She caught his wrist with both hands and locked her stance, heels grinding into ash-carved grooves. Pain flared through her shoulder wound, but she held. Cyrus hit from the side a heartbeat later and struck the blade away. It spun across stone and rang out into silence. "On your knees," Cyrus said, fangs bared. "Not yet," Valentina said, breath ragged. "He speaks first." She kept Magnus pinned long enough for the crowd to close in, for allied alphas to step to the ring edge, for every witness he wanted to gather to stand where they could not pretend they had not heard him. Blood ran down her wrist into the basin, keeping the reversal alive. Branded runes on Magnus's arms began to glow wrong, lines crawling backward over his skin. She looked straight at him. "Tell them why you poisoned the oath wine. Tell them why you hunted me at the boundary." He spat near her boots. "You are a fracture in blood law." "Say it clearly." Cyrus's voice dropped to iron. "Any last lie, Nightshade?" Magnus laughed once, raw. "Better no bloodline than a chosen one." The words hit the terraces like stones dropped in water. Wolves who had come uncertain recoiled. Even some branded followers lowered their eyes as the doctrine turned from abstraction to confession. The reversed current surged. Magnus screamed as his own runes burned back into him, not flesh tearing, but power rebounding through a system he had weaponized for others. He tried to wrench free. Valentina did not release him. He glared at Cyrus through pain and fury. "No more kings." Valentina slammed her blood-marked palm to the altar and answered, "No more cages." The circle detonated in a column of silver-red light that drove outward in a shockwave of soundless force. Torches guttered. Stones trembled. When the light fell, Magnus lay motionless on the altar steps, split crescent brand blackened and dead, ritual current gone. No one moved for 3 long breaths. Then Elira's command cut the silence. "Bind the living, confirm the dead. Healers to the captains and elder now." Cyrus came to Valentina, hands hovering before touching, asking without words. She nodded once. He steadied her as her knees threatened to fold, his forehead resting briefly against hers while the valley watched the old order break. Around them, wolves who had feared her stood in stunned quiet, listening to the same truth that had found Cyrus in a ravine. Her scent might be gone, but her heartbeat had just redrawn the law in front of all of them. Cyrus kept one arm around her waist while healers rushed past to free the captives, bind the branded, and sweep the circle for delayed runes. Valentina's palm still burned from the altar strike, and the silver-red afterglow clung to the carved channels like dawn caught in stone. Around the ring, Allied wolves watched her with a wary reverence that had not been there an hour ago. Not fear exactly, recognition, raw and unsettled. Elder Severin was brought to her first, wrists bruised from his restraints, ceremonial robes torn at the hem. He bowed low, voice unsteady. I wronged you in council. I accepted forged omens because they confirmed my prejudice. Magnus took me when I refused to certify his final right. I testify to that before every pack here. Valentina studied him, then nodded once. You will testify with the rest. In open record. Illyra strode up with blood on her sleeve that was not her own, braid half loose, expression grimly satisfied. North Terrace and East Stair are secured, Ridge archers captured alive. The two patrol captains are conscious. Magnus is confirmed dead. She held up a leather evidence satchel. Recovered from the altar vault, the dart molds, remaining viper nullroot resin, forged elder seals, cipher rolls, and temple keys. Mara has the relic basin under wardcloth. Logged tonight, Cyrus said. No private hearings. Doran of Blackwater stepped to the circle edge, removed the torque of office from his throat, and placed it on the stone between them, the old gesture of public accountability. I demanded surrender, he said. I mistook doctrine for caution. My oath stands corrected. From the lower terrace, Stoneheart's envoy tried to kneel and speak for his pack, but Cyrus raised a hand. You delivered writs and threats while your elders staged murder. You do not speak for this matter tonight. 2 Windrider guards escorted the envoy back to holding. Valentina swayed. Cyrus tightened his grip, head lowering toward hers. Can you stand for one more right? She knew which right he meant before he said it. The bond between them had been a storm without a shelter since the ravine, fierce and unfinished. She looked at the gathered witnesses, the blood moon fading toward silver at its edges, and felt the child shift safely beneath her hand. Yes, she said. If you ask me, not claim me. His gaze went feral for a heartbeat, then softened into deliberate restraint. He turned so every alpha, guard, healer, and freed captive could hear him. Valentina Stoneheart, he said, voice carrying across stone and torch smoke, I ask your consent to mark you as my equal mate before witnesses, under sovereign law, with your right to refuse, untouched. Do you accept? She held his stare. The crux was simple and vast. A bite could be possession, or it could be promise. She chose promise. I accept, she said, as your equal, and you accept mine. A low murmur moved through the terraces. Cyrus inclined his head in formal assent. I accept yours. He guided her to the center of the circle where the runes had cooled to pale silver. She lifted her hair from her neck with shaking fingers, exposing the junction of shoulder and throat. His hands framed her face first, thumbs brushing the dried tears and ash from her skin, grounding her. Then his mouth touched her skin in a reverent pause that was almost a prayer. The bite came gentle and precise. Pain lanced hot and clean through her neck, sharp enough to steal her breath, then transformed almost immediately into a spreading wave of warmth that moved through chest, belly, spine, and limbs like locked doors opening one by one. Her knees weakened. Cyrus held her upright without tightening into control. The wound pulsed once, twice, and then settled into a living thrum that matched the beat she had heard in him since the ravine. Through the bond, sensation flooded both directions. His terror on that frozen slope, his quiet fury in the council hall, his refusal to cage what he loved, her exile, her numbness at losing scent, her fierce protective love for the child, her exhausted courage stepping into the circle by choice, nothing blurred, nothing hidden. Pain stripped into truth and then into relief. His lips brushed the mark, and his whisper entered her ear and the bond at once. Mine. She caught his collar in her fist, pulled him down, and turned her face to the side of his throat where his pulse beat hard under skin. "Yours," she answered and bit. He shuddered, a rough sound breaking from him as her teeth pierced and released. The taste of him was heat and salt and moon metal. Under her hands, his runes flared bright gold, then steadied. The crowd gasped as threads of luminous bond light unfurled around them, winding from her mark to his and back again in spirals that looked almost woven, not chained. Their pulses locked fully, not one dominating the other, two rhythms choosing a common cadence. He pressed his forehead to hers, breath ragged now. Mate. The word broke something tight behind her ribs in the best possible way. She answered the same way, voice cracked and sure. Mate. They stood like that while moonlight shifted from red to silver across the valley, holding each other as the bond settled from blaze to ember, from emergency to home. When she finally opened her eyes, Mara was crying without embarrassment. Illyra was pretending not to, and even hard-faced commanders looked away to grant them privacy inside public witness. 3 nights later, the Allied Council reconvened in the Windrider Great Hall with every ledger open and every accusation spoken aloud. Mara presented the laboratory findings first. Viper null root compound matched in Valentina's blood, the ravine darts, and Magnus's altar stalks. Illyra entered the recovered physical evidence one item at a time, each sealed and witnessed. Dart molds, resin vials, forged seals, cipher rolls, temple keys, the copper ring, the litany hide, the relic basin, and the split ritual blade recovered from Council Stone. Scribes copied every line into 3 archives. Nothing vanished into private vaults. Severin testified under oath that Magnus had courted him with fabricated prophecy fragments and copied temple signatures, then abducted him when he refused to consecrate the blood moon rite. Doran corroborated the spread of forged omens through Blackwater roads. The 2 rescued patrol captains named the Infirmary Infiltrator, a Stoneheart quartermaster bribed through Brannique's circle. Before sentencing, neutral marshals entered formal record that Elder Brannique and Luna Morell had been apprehended and transferred into neutral guard custody for judgment. By sunset, verdicts were rendered in full assembly. Brannique and Morell were stripped of rank, bound for trial labor under neutral guard, and barred from holding office or ritual authority for life. The Stoneheart envoy who delivered transfer writs was released to carry the judgment home with a formal warning. Any retaliation against witnesses triggered Crown sanction. The captured branded followers were divided by culpability. The violent core received prison sentences, while coerced recruits entered supervised restoration oaths under healer oversight. No purge, no doctrine theater. Law recorded. Then Cyrus stood, removed his crown, and placed it in Valentina's hands. By sovereign covenant, he said, I name Valentina Stoneheart High Luna, of the Windrider realm and keeper of the Heartline, equal in law, war, and succession. The hall knelt. She set the crown on her own head, then offered him her hand and drew him up beside her so they stood together, not one above. By the same covenant, she said, voice steady, scent can no longer be used as sole proof of belonging, guilt, rank, or right. From this night, recognition rests on oath and heart. Sanctuary is guaranteed for pregnant wolves, wounded wolves, and the falsely accused across Allied lands. Violation of sanctuary is treason. The vote was called immediately. One by one, alphas spoke assent. Even those who hesitated did so under the weight of blood moon witness and undeniable evidence. The new covenant passed before the final bell. At the restored moon temple a week later, cedar smoke rose clean into a clear sky, while children from 3 packs ran ribbons between the pillars and argued cheerfully over whose knotwork was neatest. Illyra, temple-stern and secretly pleased, pretended to inspect their work, and then fixed 2 knots herself when she thought no one watched. Mara laid fresh herbs by the birthing chamber and lectured Cyrus about sleep with the authority of a queen and the vocabulary of a battlefield medic. Valentina stood at the temple threshold with Cyrus behind her, his arms around her, and both their hands over the curve of her belly. The bond between them no longer roared. It hummed, steady as breathing, strong as stone warmed by sun. He bent to her ear, voice quiet and unguarded. I found you without scent, by the sound of your living heart. She leaned back into him, smiling for the first time without caution. Then keep listening, because it beats for us. Below the temple steps, wolves who had once measured worth by bloodline and perfume stood shoulder to shoulder under new law, and for the first time since the poisoned feast, Valentina did not feel borrowed or provisional in her own life. She felt claimed by choice, crowned without erasure, and utterly, fiercely at home.